Commissioner for Entrepreneurs and Consumers' Rights. No, it was a slip of the tongue. Alexei Gruzdev, Deputy Minister of Economic Development of the Russian Federation. Pasquale Terracciano, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of the Italian Republic to the Russian Federation. Let's welcome our guest. Malena Moore, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of the Kingdom of Sweden to the Russian Federation. Ms. Deborah Bronner, British Ambassador to the Russian Federation. And His Excellency Paulo Pinheiro, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of Portugal to the Russian Federation. The agenda of our special session is very relevant because early in this year, the whole of the world trade and economy has faced an unprecedented shock, which has been discussed everywhere. The World Trade Organization was sounding the alarm bells. Goods seem to have disappeared from shops around the world, and those skeptics of globalization seemed to have triumphed, saying that we did warn you, didn't we? Now we must see what's to be done and how are we supposed to proceed. We are now getting only a glimpse of what needs to be done. There's an incident or story, if you wish, that happened yesterday. I have a friend, just a friend of mine, who is a good friend of mine, and he's fond of beer. He's a great beer drinking, and he used to take Japanese made crackers, salt crackers from Japan. And in mid-February, there was an interruption of supply. And about 2 days ago, I saw him and asked what with the resumption of air traffic service, what about the crackers? And he said, you know, I have now switched on to the Russian-made ones, and I feel fine. That is something of a symbolic story that could be applied to more difficult or complex components. But let me start with inviting Anatoly Vasilievich, who is our host, and he has been welcoming us here. Despite the story we have just heard, which seems to illustrate the positive side of localization, I do believe that globalization has not been totally curtailed, and in all issues relating to modern technologies, breakthrough technologies, biotechnologies, particularly vital during the pandemic period, will have to be continued, this cooperation. I mean, in early this year, even before pandemic, I had plans for some five trips, including one to Great Britain for presentations and attending meetings. But I now feel an urgent need for communication in my sphere, science, education, diplomacy, and I do imagine that the process of globalization, although we are dealing with the economics today, or with the world economy, is unstoppable globalization. And it used to be the situation when two-thirds of components were manufactured in China. Today, there has been a transfer of production, and some of the statistics did amaze me, but I believe that even now, this connections or cooperation revival process is getting underway. But one evidence of globalization is development of links in the sphere of education, international links, and educating specialists or educationalists. I'm sure Your Excellencies, the ambassadors, could subscribe to that. Suffice it to say, we have started 3 new joint programs with the Italian universities. We have excellent connections with the British institutes and universities, and we have had a joint program with Sweden in that area, and with Portugal. Those students learning Portuguese are very happy to take advantage of this opportunity. We are dealing with educated students in economics and business, but as well in law, trade law, international law, and I am sure that despite these new developments and factors which emerged during the pandemic and the importance of national policy and national considerations, we must proceed from the premise that international cooperation will acquire new and new aspects, both generally and in the economic sphere. Thank you very much. At least we have one vote or one voice in favor of globalization. I wonder if we'll have more voices heard in favor of localization, but there could be no comparison in the area of digitalization when we say that many companies have gained from this process, but not all sectors can boast such success. Yes, indeed. As we were preparing this forum jointly with MGIMO, Sberbank, and other organizations, we saw the absolute urgent need for a session like this, because the point of by focusing is a vital one, because everyone is interested to know what development trend will be followed in future. And these two vectors seem to be opposite to one another. And for decades, the world economy, following the world politics, had seemed to be following the path of globalization. And to agree here with Mr. Turkunov, there is no alternative. But the question is, what's the cause and who is to blame? We have here on the panel with us officials from many countries. So my question is, who is to blame? Politicians, not business community, not at all. It seems This is a very unusual challenge, that of the coronavirus. Yes, we had previously faced some of it, but not as a global pandemic. That's for the first time we are being affected. Not all politicians always knew how to respond, but the fact that each country was now facing the situation on its own, separately. On the one hand, everyone says we are prepared to share, but there has been nothing done in reality. Everyone seems to have closed down borders. The airplanes are grounded, and there's no railway service, not 100%, but mostly. So we were forced to follow the path of localization because many of the goods chains have been broken, and we first the situation of the need for self-sufficiency in production of components. We are facing this kind of pandemic today, but who knows what kind of pandemic we may face tomorrow. So everyone is looking for a localized method. And as to IT technologies, the companies involved in IT technologies are all developing their own software, and there's this wariness of one another, both nationally and internationally. So there's an impetus to develop one's own proprietary software without the need to borrow or buy from the outside. The pandemic has intensified the trends to customization and localization of small size production. If we want to produce slippers for the world as a whole, that doesn't look lucrative any longer because of the growth of costs. But on the other hand, you've got to respond to the demand of the immediate customer, and this dictates the need for robotics or 3D printing, and it is an area for small productions operating in local markets, and they seem to be more competitive than major producers depending on international supply chains. But I, on the other hand, would say, and here we have His Excellency Ambassador of Portugal, but our former trade representative in China is here as well. So those are far apart, but a single economic space without Great Britain, I'm afraid, should be preserved. We, as well as our expert community, mostly believe that both Russia and our European neighbors will only gain from the open border policy, and we would gain more than if we erect barriers. Although there is a clear trend towards localization, customized production, and mini markets, but on the other hand, there's no alternative to globalization. Thank you. Well, if we seem to have been discussing this agenda through the prism of fighting the coronavirus pandemic. Let's take a look at the situation historically, in the historical perspective. Italy was the first hit. Here in Russia, we have always associated Italy with beauty, design, and the people in Moscow then mentioned the fact with real pain and sorrow. One might have imagined it was a place in Russia, somehow something like Voronezh, not Rome and Italy, that was particularly suffering. But we can see the results of the Italian effort already today. Your Excellency, Ambassador Terracciano, how do you view the way of revival and restoration of the economy?
Yes, as you rightly said, Italy was the first country to be hit by the pandemic in Europe or outside China. wa- was hit very strongly and very suddenly. But I think that the country, the institutions, the people uh, reacted very well. We were the first country to apply a national lockdown, which worked to bring the situation under control. And I think that we also set an example for other countries which were hit subsequently. Now, of course, apart from the tragic loss of lives, there was a huge damage to our economy. And to counter this, the recession, and to help to kickstart the recovery, uh, the government uh, the government approved a plan of around 100 billion euros to sustain the worst hit sectors of the economy, and particularly to guarantee liquidity to small and medium companies in Italy. As you probably know, small and medium companies in Italy amount to around 80% of GDP. And 95% of companies in Italy are small or medium. They are very resilient. As you said, they are the custodian of the style, capacity of innovation of the Italian production, but they might suffer because of their dimension. They might suffer a lack of liquidity. So this is why the plan adopted by the government was so important. And this is why the recovery plan adopted by the European Union is also very important. Now, both things, I've mentioned the importance of small and medium companies and the importance of the recovery plan adopted by the European Union. I think that both factors play an important role in this debate regarding the future of globalization and the possible return of localization. I'm inclined to avoid all ideology in general, but particular when you speak of economics. Uh, the the great, probably I consider him the greatest economy of our time, John Maynard Keynes. He would say, when facts change, I change my mind. And I think this is the right way to approach a problem. Now, I don't think that we will see the demise of globalization. But at the same time, so it's wrong to believe that now there is a new era, which is localization. As it was wrong to consider globalization as something that had to happen always, anyhow, at constant speed. You can have sometimes, you can stop and adapt to new circumstances. So I don't think that our economies will give their back to globalization. The advantages that globalization brought to us are too huge to be dismissed and ignored for the future. At the same time, this crisis gave us the opportunity to have a more pragmatic look at globalization, not ideological, and consider sometimes you can have issues of security of supply, you can have issues of quality, sustainability of supply. And this pause of reflection, I think, gives us the opportunity to accept that maybe it's good to have a complement to global value chains at local level. This can be also more competitive because again you have different suppliers, and also, as I said, can be very useful in case of disruption of these global value chains to ensure that you have all the necessary supply all the time. But the second, I said that there were two elements. One is the international cooperation and regional integration. I think that the moment that you have to balance globalization with localization, the fact that you your country moves into a unified market, integrated market, can be very useful to offset the disadvantages of having to revert to local supply. And I think that the European Union has reacted reasonably well to this crisis, and this bodes well for the future. The second element is just small and medium companies. I think that small and medium companies give you that flexibility to react locally when you have a shock and you have a disruption. In Italy, we had a lot of small, medium companies in the fashion sector, for example, that immediately started to produce masks and gowns, for example. And the fact that you are small, yes, gives you a disadvantage because of liquidity, access to finance, but a big advantage because you are resilient. You can switch production very quickly. And also, normally, small and medium companies are controlled at family level. And so that fact, which has always frequently been considered as a hindrance to development because maybe you are not necessarily always up to date with the trends, global trends, but this gives the company the perspective, not the short-term perspective that normally you have if you do not have someone directly involved in the management and the ownership of the company. And so people that can decide that maybe they give up profits for a couple of years to put their company in a position to take advantage of future trends of trade in 3, 5, 6 years time frame. And this is, again, of course, it's important the moment that we have to combine globalization with localization. Спасибо вам.
Thank you very much. I must say that I was surprised to see that masks started appearing in our shops very quickly, and how much people switched from the question, where did you get the mask, to the question of how much does your mask cost? And people were boasting about who produced their mask, what brand it was produced by, and so on and so forth. So it shows that we have this ability to adapt, and we are very resilient. If now we open the internet, we access the internet and read some articles of authors who are pessimistic about the recovery of the economy, the people who are most worried are the people who were advocating ever higher level technologies, not only digital ones, but in particular the green ones. It is usually believed that the current crisis will somehow dampen the interest to these issues because it's more important for people to survive than to make their production more environmentally friendly. And from this viewpoint, I would like to ask Ms. Deborah Bronnert from Britain, because Britain has always put a premium on the topic of the green economy and green, environmentally friendly production. How does Britain see the possibility of continuing the dynamic development in this process without losing the tempo?
Perhaps I shouldn't admit to this, but this is an Italian mask that I'm holding in my hand. I have British ones and Russian ones. Um, but I think, no, thank you very much for the invitation, and it's a great pleasure to join this distinguished panel. Um, I think there is, and I would argue that there is not a choice to be made between if you like, a green recovery and digital transformation and recovering our economies after the terrible impact of COVID. So I think from a British perspective, it's very clear that we can and we need to tackle all of these questions together. And if I may, I'll illustrate the fact that we are confident that this is possible by our own, what has happened within the United Kingdom. So over the last, between 1985 and 2016, our GDP has grown by 70%. At the same time, we've reduced our carbon emissions by 34%. So we haven't chosen green and not growth. We think it's important for everyone to go for growth and green at the same time. The share of coal-generated electricity in the UK has fallen from 40% in 2012 to just 2% in 2019. And this year, 2020, we've gone for 61 consecutive days without any coal-generated electricity at all. And that's the longest run for us since the 19th century. So we were an economy that was hooked on coal, and in quite a short space of time, we have moved towards renewables, and renewable share of electricity generation has gone from 11% in 2012 to 37% in 2019. At the same time, our GDP grew by 16%. So again, we're not choosing green growth instead of prosperity, we're putting them together. And this message we think is really important because we only have one planet. We are dealing with the current threat of COVID-19, but the threat of climate change is already upon us in many parts of the world. And next year, many of you will be aware that in Glasgow, we will have the next United Nations Climate Change Conference of the Parties, known as COP26, in November 2021. We're doing that in partnership with Italy. So part of our message, both in what we are doing domestically, but also working in preparation for that, is how do we recover from COVID-19, but at the same time prepare for that conference and take the necessary action to really rebuild the economy. As I've said, we don't think it's a choice. There's for example, the International Energy Agency, their 3-year sustainable recovery plan to tackle the current economic crisis they suspect would boost global economic growth by 1.1 percentage points, could save or create 9 million jobs a year. IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency, thinks that for every $1 spent on the transition to renewable energy, benefits of between $3 and $8 would accrue. And that, of course, means cleaner air, it means cheaper power, it means more investment, it means more jobs, more opportunities. In the United Kingdom, in our COVID recovery package, we're investing public money in trying to combine all of these objectives. So we're investing over £3 billion in a green recovery. That's around 300 billion rubles. And that includes, for example, a £2 billion investment in energy efficiency of homes. What that does is it tackles social issues, energy poverty, it creates jobs and economic growth, and it reduces our carbon footprint sustainably. We have a range of other funds and other investments which are designed to also push the digital economy in a sustainable, low carbon way. In Russia, as elsewhere, we think the costs of not tackling climate change are very clear. We had earlier this year the terrible accident with the melting of the permafrost, and Russia's audit chamber estimated that climate change could knock up to 3% of Russia's GDP by 2030. And of course, in Russia, again as elsewhere, we're seeing more and more extreme climate events. We're also seeing in Russia, though, some really great opportunities for low carbon energy, and the Bashmakov Center for Energy Efficiency, the Russian Bashmakov Center, estimates that improving energy efficiency of public buildings could save Russia 250 billion rubles a year. And of course, Russia has so much to offer on climate, with over 20% of the world's forests, meaning that Russia can play a really significant role on tackling climate change and on advancing the global transition to a low-carbon economy. Of course, I'm very conscious of the huge role that carbon fuel does play in Russia, but I think there is another side to that as well. Of course, we and other parties to the Paris Agreement were delighted when Russia implemented that, signed up to that last year, and with the setting out of the draft low carbon development strategy, I'm hoping we might hear a bit more about that, and we're hoping that we can work with Russia in the run-up to COP26 to drive greater ambition and tackle the common challenges. It matters here just as it matters elsewhere in the world. Business, of course, has a huge role to play. And again, we're seeing across the world big business and small business coming together with the aim of achieving net zero carbon emissions by 2050, as this is part of the race to zero. 995 businesses, 449 cities, 38 investors have signed this agreement. That represents 53% of global GDP and 23% of global CO2 emissions. And of course, some of the largest investors in Russia, foreign investors in Russia, including both BP and Shell, and Unilever yesterday pledged to remove fossil fuels from its products by 2030 as the first step to get to net zero by 2039. So I think businesses such as these are really recognizing the pressure from consumers, the pressure from their own employees, the pressure from governments to really take strong action and do it now so that they will remain and increase their profitability. So again, this isn't about charity, this is about profitability and the prosperity of their consumers and workforce. And of course, I'm aware that many Russian companies are engaged in this. The financial sector too is also responding to this trend, and we're seeing green finance and green bonds and a lot of interest again with Russian companies working with British companies and others. And of course, with all of this, digital development is so important. We've all got to know Zoom and WhatsApp and all sorts of other mechanisms, perhaps more than we would like over the last few months. But what that has done is it's, I think, made all of us rethink whether we need to take that flight. The UK didn't close its borders, but flights have reduced. We didn't close our borders. It's a matter of some discussion within the UK, but we didn't. But there's a lot of things I think this crisis can make us reflect on as to what can we do better in a way that enables us to grow our economies again, but in a sustainable way. And so just, we can do this. We all contribute to climate change, every one of us, and we all share the responsibility for tackling it and preserving the planet for future generations. And so we are keen to work with all international partners to build up to Paris, to implement Paris, build up to COP26 in Glasgow next year, and start really to repair the terrible damage that COVID-19 has done, alongside the terrible damage that climate is doing and will do if we don't act now. Thank you.
If I may, I would like to add that both Russian and British business now feel not only the negative consequences of the climate change, because the people in the vineyards of the south have felt what a drought means. And the French champagne is actually giving way to the British champagne, which is having some advantages thanks to the global warming. Thank you very much, Ms. Bronard. Well, of course, there won't be anyone here who would contest your statement that moving towards green technologies and ensuring a green recovery is very important. Everyone accepts this. But let us agree that the process of this transition does require a certain financial cushion. It requires a certain financial reserve, which so far not all the countries have. And there are countries that don't have many energy resources who would like to switch to renewable sources of electricity, but they very often lack the resources to create such renewable energy sources. Russia is a country which does not have any problems with energy sources. Russia has never complained of not having reserves for making, well, a push forward. We have reference books about the best technologies that could serve as a bridge to the best green technologies. But now I would like to ask Alexei Vladimirovich to tell us more about our achievements here, because little is known in about Russia abroad, about how Russia is switching to green technologies. Thank you. I shall start with answering your question, but I would like to touch upon the more general topic, globalization versus localization, because the green technologies issue is not only the issue of protecting the environment, which of course does require investment and it requires a lot of effort, but it's also a question of competitiveness. And access to the market for the products it produces. Well, of course, introducing new cutting-edge technologies and limiting the aggravating consequences for the environment is something that we are working on. We have been working on since 2014, probably, when we started speaking about the best available accessible technologies. And this launched several changes when we gave up ineffective and dangerous technologies. We formulated the principles of the best available technologies, and we have special reference books which you mentioned. What do they contain? They contain certain rules and analytical information about the state of a certain sector, the technical parameters of this sector, its economic parameters, and the best practices, the best rules which are available, accessible, and can be implemented in practice. And from 2015 to 2017, we have already published several such reference books. They are accessible, and they introduce new standards, new regulation rules, and the Russian standard ministry is working on them. And the task is to make production more efficient, to improve the purification standards, and this, of course, will diminish the negative consequences of production and of the energy problems. Now, there were several enterprises which were divided into 4 categories depending on how much risk they posed, and which were supposed to introduce the best technologies, the best green technologies by 2031. There are different stages, but the reference point will be 2031. It's a very costly process. When we estimated the investment that will be necessary, even for the basic industries, which are the worst contaminators, 8 trillion rubles will be necessary for investment in the new technological processes. So all kinds of incentives and the support of the government will be necessary to make it happen. And such a program has been worked out. Of course, we also are supposed to suggest a number of benefits and tax relief measures to such companies, and it is possible to offset some of the investment they make. Because there is such an economic measure as the payment for the contamination of the environment. So this can serve as an incentive, giving them a break within this system. Then there's also an investment tax credit, and this can be granted either at the regional or at the federal level for the companies that have decided to resort to it, to use such a credit. It's a medium-term credit up to 10 years. And of course, in 2014, the Foundation for Developing Industry was created. And again, its aim was to stimulate, to give incentives to upgrading the industries. And according to our information, the foundation has about 700 projects, and most of them are using the best green available technologies. And the government has supported such projects, and this is quite a substantial amount.
Another possible means is financial subsidies for the so-called green bonds, and we are planning to increase the scope of the program, and all those measures taken together perhaps could serve as or could serve to promote transition of enterprises to these new technologies and to new technological policies. But we must also seek to raise overall competitiveness. But let me get back to globalization versus localization. Your question implied that not all countries possess a similar set of resources and they have a clear need for alternative technologies, but there must be a realization of the importance of competitive advantage and the lack of certain resources should not act as a barrier to products which have a competitive advantage. What I'm trying to say is while uh, reinstating our need in globalization versus localization, we do believe there will not emerge any new barriers between states. We want this issue to be looked in from all aspects, considering the costs that may result for individual countries, both here in Russia as well as in the EU, and in terms of investment, among other things. We have been trying to take urgent measures to stabilize production, and hence we have observed this trend towards localization as a means to compensate for the loss of global supply chains. But one trend should not replace the other, because we would then see the death of certain types of production that would not have a place in the global markets, although we do accept the need for globalization. On the other hand, localization, while taking into account the specificity of a particular nation, must also look at the technologies and the features and the various needs of neighboring countries. We are not looking at establishing any productions that would replicate production in other states, which could be of interest to us. We would then avoid the negative effect of competitors without the need for unnecessary competitiveness within a particular set of countries. And both technology and component supplies should all work hand in hand based on the accumulated base of knowledge. Mr. Drachaner is here with us, who was involved in signing a new agreement with an Italian company on starting a new enterprise for production of steel, and that proves once again how we could successfully cooperate internationally rather than move locally in our separate directions. Thank you very much.
May I just add one thing to what the Deputy Minister said? This agreement is for a new kind of technology in steel production, which reduces CO2 emissions by 2/3. And I think this is also very important to see how we can proceed on towards more sustainable productions.
Once we mention the countries that must preserve and sustain their competitiveness in the area of new technologies, why don't we look at the country which, despite its modest size, is very deeply involved in globalization and was a focus of attention as the coronavirus infection development. In my international career, for example, I have been surprised to see Sweden and Belarus to be mentioned one after another close together. Sweden has chosen its own individual way, some say a controversial one, and people may argue about the value of it for years to come, but maybe Ms. Mard, Your Excellency, you could tell us more about the Swedish way and the green technologies in particular. Yes, we can hear you. I would say there's a lot of mythology around Sweden. The coronavirus was treated very seriously, although the schools were open, but it doesn't signify we were not taking the virus with a light heart. We were quite serious about tackling the crisis, and we are still doing that. It's not a matter of a couple of months. And for us in Sweden, the aim was, like elsewhere, to protect our population, to know that we do have a hospital that would function when a need emerges, that schools must function as before. To us, this was an important aim. I do believe everyone wanted that. Depends on a particular society and may vary from country to country. And we did take the necessary measures. Sweden is a small country with an open economy. To us, globalization is a part of our genes. This is the basis for our economy. And as we could see, Ericsson, IKEA, and other companies have really been hit by this global pandemic, and they felt that supply chain was affected, and the sector of services suffered in particular. The government did introduce measures early in May and in late April. In some of the recent statistics by is minus 46% of minus 46%, which is a very serious drop in GDP, with the unemployment level standing at about 9%. It's a terrible and a tremendous shock to us. We used to have a very low state debt, and we must apply every financial measure available. Мы должны перезарядить Mexico. We know that we are part of the European Union, and to us, this is the package of manners is important. Digitalization, the pandemic, as I see it, has particularly focused on this trend. Ericsson, the Swedish company that has been cooperating with the Russian market, has been engaged in digitalization, which is something that will be on the agenda for a lot of time to come. We have been used the term of circular economy. It's a high point on our agenda. Pandemic or no pandemic, the global warming is here, and our future generations will see more of it. It is a clear demand that this should come to the very top of our agenda. Yes, that is a high demand on our science, on our politicians, imposes new challenges on them. I don't think my Russian is sufficient to explain it all, but I must
Minister of Sweden, Stefan Löfven, was up in the very north of Sweden, in Luleå, and he inaugurated a pilot plant called Hybrid. This is a process that has been developed in Sweden, and the ambition is that in 20 years the Swedish steel industry should be totally fossil and carbon dioxide free. And for Sweden, this is very important. Steel built a lot of our society. Swedish steel industry, I hope, is somewhat known around the world, and we see a continued demand for steel. But we also know that it's extremely important. It's an extremely big pollutant in the way for carbon dioxide. In the case of Sweden, it's 10% of our carbon dioxide emission that comes from this. I think it's 7% globally. So with this hybrid, which is based on our companies going together, making huge investments, support of course, other sectors, we have high ambitions, and I think this will continue to high, because in Sweden, new technology means new jobs, and means that we will be able to deliver also for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Those officials representing Sweden have traditionally been very optimistic about the future. I would like perhaps to bring you back to earth somehow, to make you see the more the sadder reality. One of the aspects of the world economy which has had almost a lethal shock is tourism. You cannot argue that. And here, localization did play a role, because here in Russia, many people may have only now realized that Russia has a sea. Why so? Because it was Portugal that closed the border and made it impossible for Russian tourists to have a beach holiday there. I am sure Portugal has more to offer in terms of economics in agriculture, but I would like everyone maybe to see some of the darker side of the situation. Maybe Your Excellency, Ambassador Pinheiro, you will say a few words on how the tourist industry will be recovering. Спасибо.
I would like to say that globalization, well, you know, the Portuguese sailors in the 16th century, they started the pioneering the globalization first phenomenon. And I do think that globalization is here to stay. Even before the pandemics, the main challenge of international organizations, as IMF, OECD, World Bank, were related to shaping the globalization, to reduce the inequalities and the imbalances that globalization also brought, besides the positive changes by millions and hundreds of millions of people that benefited from the globalization. So, but globalization also brought inequalities. And so what I believe that the pandemics, by the way, is a global challenge, by the way, is not a local, it has some local responses, but the main response to the pandemics is a global one. There's nothing of that has to do with the investigation, the research and technologies are all global processes. Even testing a vaccine, you need a global process. So I think what we'll probably will see in this discussion about globalization versus localization is that you will have a different globalization and a different localization. The digital transition is a global process. You cannot, in a single country, can do the global transition. The transition to digital world is a global one. The technologies, the several different technologies. Artificial intelligence is going to be a global process. But yes, I think all these challenges need more global responses, as we did in Europe, in European Union. For the first time, EU had this very strong and solidarity response. For Portugal was fundamental that we get the recovery fund and the budget, the multi-year budget fund. Portugal will have a massive bazooka support for responding to the social crisis. Yes, there is this negative dimension. Human beings are being affected tremendously in the pandemics and the after pandemics. But we got this massive response. In Portugal, we will benefit around 45 billion euros from non-refundable funds to use until 2026. And also we'll have 10 billion euros extra more with the loans. So we have to tackle first and foremost the social crisis. How many companies will disappear? Micro, small, mid-sized? We don't know. We probably will see that in the end of the year, perhaps in the first quarter of 21. Right now, I don't think there is firm scientific evidence that will say how many will survive. What we know for sure is that we have to respond swiftly and strongly to support the families and to support companies. And this is our great challenge. Our great challenge is to use these times as an opportunity to address structural problems in our economy and social problems in our economy. This is a big shock. There is what economists call the destructive process of our creation. We didn't see any bigger destructive process than the pandemics. So we have to build on the positives on the pandemics, including better air. For the first time in Portugal, we see the dolphins again in the River Tajo in Lisbon. Many animals are returning to the mountains. So yes, we can see a better air. So can we build on this? So our main challenges will be the qualification of the Portuguese working force. It's a huge challenge. We have to speed up. I think the globalization, the pandemics is a challenge to speed up the globalization trends in certain way. And so we start with the working force, with the people. People first, persons first. Capitalize our companies. It's an old problem. How to capitalize? How to become them competitive? Not to destroy global value chains. That will not be destroyed. They will be changed, for sure, in the strategic areas, in this health. That became very evident that we needed a different type of response, also global response. Second is the guaranteed regular source to the income for families, disposable income for families, is vital in order to, if you have an economic crisis, you don't need a social crisis. Also, to increase our productivity. It's now the time to do it. It's not later on. It's now that we have this bazooka financing. Speed up our justice system, I think, is one of the fundamental competitive factor, is the justice. Justice systems play a fundamental role. And then to diversify our energy supply sources. On tourism, yes, it's one of our largest economic activity. For instance, in Portugal, the official data in 2019 is that it was responsible for more than 50% of the exports of services. 50% of export of services. And accounts for almost 20% of the total exports. The tourist revenues, only tourist revenues, Portugal contribute to almost 8.7, almost 9% of GDP. So this is a big challenge because tourism was bigly affected, was hugely affected by the pandemics. What are you going to do? Well, first to a survival kit for the best tourist companies and services. And this is what we are doing. In the fiscal system, in the tax system, a lot of moratoriums, a lot of exceptional recovery plans to value the companies and tourism, the local tourism, the micro companies, the small-sized companies, and as Pascal Terracciano was mentioning, it's fundamental to speed up and support the SMEs in this area. So the clean and safe stamp, we are moving that very strongly to have clean and safe stamps for the time being. And of course, all the campaigns in national. We do believe that, you know, pandemic is not going to stay forever. So, but we can use this time to really change our economies and our societies, not only the economies, to accelerate the digital transition, the climate transition, and of course the energy transition. We in the EU, you have this biggest partner, Russia, is moving to a green agenda fast and furious, if I can say like so. And we need Russia also to be active part in this process, because it's going to be the future of our lives and our descendants, our sons and our daughters and our grandsons. So I do believe that Russia and Europe will work ever more close together in these big challenges. They are global, need some local responses, but these are the balance between localization and globalization now is key for a better world. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Ambassador. Well, you actually mentioned, and as everyone else did also, that it's very important that for different sizes, the pandemic brought different challenges. Прошу прощения. Да, и для в зависимости от того, какого размера был бизнес,
И в зависимости от того, and depending on how big a business was, an enterprise was, the crisis actually meant a bigger blow or a smaller blow. I work in the media, and we organized a roundtable discussion with the media industries of other countries, a number of foreign countries, and the task was to tell the audience about how pandemic made the lives of journalists difficult. But in the final count, what we actually came to was that starting with Russia and China and ending with Brazil and South Africa, we say, well, after all, it's not so bad. More people are starting to use the internet. More people are responding to advertisements on the internet. More people are reading the news. So there are some positive consequences. And besides panelists, there are a number of other experts from different countries. We have only 15 or 20 minutes. And I would like them to say a few words. Do we have a microphone? If possible, for a number of reasons, I would like to begin with Germany and Mr. Matthias Schepp, who is chairman of the board of the Russian-German Chamber of Commerce. A lot has already been said about globalization and localization, and as usual, we would like to hear what the German perspective on it is. I understand what you say, I got it. Well, brevity is the sister of talent. And globalization will not disappear into thin air. Now it has become fashionable to say Russia first, US first, India first, China first, and that reminds me of the last German emperor, Wilhelm II. When he came to the throne, when he acceded to the throne, and it was at the same time the first auto was produced in the United States. This politician said that he did not think that the auto industry had a future. He said that autos were some side development. He still believed in horses. We all know now that he was mistaken. Even now, I think it has, in the conditions of the coronavirus epidemic, it has become more fashionable to say something first. And I cannot quite agree with what Boris Yurievich said. I cannot quite accept the methods we are using to respond to the coronavirus. Maybe emotionally, yes. Localization. Let us close everything down. But I'm glad that besides the presidential commissioner and a big businessman, I see many businessmen and diplomats here. I address you suggesting that we should start and think about how we should be countering this coronavirus of the 21st century. I promise to be brief, but I would like to say one thing. It is absolutely incorrect, or maybe even stupid, if we close the borders to business traffic. We have actually closed everything down, leaving only small passages for business traffic, economic traffic between Russia and the European Union. And this is wrong. It is important to travel in planes from one country to another, and when you can always take tests, and they can again have a test in another country when they come, for example, from Europe to Moscow. What are we doing? We actually make the people who want to invest money, we make them stay for 2 weeks in either one of the European Union countries or in Russia without doing anything. This defies understanding. In Frankfurt or somewhere else, it's impossible. There are so many tests that we can do. The head of Lufthansa said that 50,000 tests could be administered in one day. But we very often prefer to give assistance to companies, but we don't help our technological experts and our businessmen to travel. But that would be the best way of doing business. That is something that would help us. In Germany, we believe ourselves, one of the champions, one of the best organizers in the world. If we can organize in Munich Munich or in Frankfurt, tens of meetings with people for testing, I think then we should keep silent about it. We see Russia, a country with brilliant IT experts. Well, let us draw the following conclusion from this meeting today. Let us work in this direction, continue our contacts. And the conference in 2020 wouldn't be a conference 2020 if we didn't listen to someone thanks to the Zoom technology. And we have the president of the American Chamber of Commerce in Russia, Mr. Alexis Rodzenko. We seem to hear each other, we have contact. Could you please tell us, have you been following what today's speakers have been saying? I presume America First has already been mentioned. Could you please share your perspective on these issues? Yes, thank you. First, I would like to agree with Matthias Schapp wholeheartedly that restrictions that are being introduced on the movements, even for highly salaried people, experts who live in Russia with their families and work here, I think that every country in Europe and the United States and Russia has been affected by this virus. Well, more or less at the same level. And at the same time, every country believes that the other countries are more dangerous and don't allow citizens from other countries to come into their country. I would support what Matthias said, that we shouldn't restrict the movement of people who are interested in doing things together about how we should combat the COVID spread. This test before departure and after arrival should replace all the other things, all the other measures. A member of the American Chamber, an Irish person who lives in Britain, Britain was open for flights from Russia. He arrived, but he has an Irish passport. And the Irish live in Britain without any special residence permit. So he arrived in Russia, but without a document verifying that he lived in Britain, he was not allowed to enter Russia. So he had to return to Britain simply because he didn't have a British passport but an Irish passport. So I would call on everyone to be more commonsensical and pay more attention not to all those papers, not to all those documents, but think in the spirit of common sense. Yes, I think there is a group of people who actually argue that all the economic problems have been caused not by the virus but by the quarantine. And they suggest that we should draw a clear line between them. And in order to make our discussion more complete and not only presenting the Western viewpoint, I would like Mr. Tenozum Seda to tell us about what is going on in trade between Russia and Japan. Tetsuo-san. I would like to say that I'm very glad to be speaking here at Ngimo because I started learning Russian 25 years ago here at Ngimo. I would like to say first and foremost that I am for globalization because the possibilities of one country, of one side, may be limited if it has rich natural resources or high technologies. Every country needs partners in trade. And I would like to present to your attention some of the data on world trade. You said that the trade turnover has fallen very sharply this year. But this trend actually began last year. It first happened last year for the first time since 2009, when, because of the world crisis and the bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers took place. And the countries had to reorient its policies from exporting or importing towards domestic production. Replacing the imports with domestically produced goods. On the one hand, it has beneficial effects for business because new possibilities are created for making this production more attractive, and the economic climate, overall economic climate improves. But there's also the negative aspect. And we can cite the measures, protective measures in the sphere of public procurement of electronic devices, electronic equipment. I don't know how this process is implemented, but such a process can be damaging to the recovery of the economy. That is why I believe that speaking of globalization and localization, we should find a good balance between globalization and localization, just as the Portuguese ambassador has said. I would also like to speak of some cooperation and cite some examples of cooperation in this field, but for lack of time, I simply can't do that. If you would like to hear how Japanese companies are cooperating with Russian companies, I can tell you this after the session. Thank you very much indeed. Dear colleagues, dear guests, unfortunately, our time has come to an end, has run out, and I would like to give the floor to Boris Yurievich to say a few words in conclusion of our session, to say something very smart and clever. I'm now looking for the figures. 2,159 people have been following us on the internet. I think our session has attracted a lot of attention, and 2 parallel sessions have also been taking place at the same time. I think the question of whether we shall have some common space in the world, economic, political, and otherwise, is very important, and it is of great interest to everyone. All the problems, the warming of the climate and many political problems, the localization of markets, the accessibility of markets, we cannot go against the trends if we want to think not only about tomorrow, but also about the day after tomorrow. I think we should be very cautious towards locking the borders, to locking down the borders. I think it was a kind of a spontaneous response, but I think it was a political reaction. Business probably had to follow the lead. And now, from what the business community has presented, I think that we are more progressive. Besides locking people down, isolating them at home, there are more methods of preventing the spread of the virus than just locking people in their small, self-contained flats. Now people are speaking about this second wave, which is beginning somewhere or is not beginning anywhere, but we are better prepared for it. We already know something about it. I hope we shall never allow what happened, well, in spring. We won't allow the economy to drop by 40% like it happened in Sweden or anywhere. We should work and act differently. Thank you very much.